Alright, I'm just going to leave this as a brief reminder, but this is going to be part 2. And for nothing else, it's just going to be for me to help out. I'm going to try to see if I can link these, kind of like when they do, I think that's only when they do uploads where they can do like double. Anyway, I'll try to link the first one in the end comment, I think, or whatever it's called. Anyway, let's go ahead and continue on. Caleb Maupin talks a lot, even more than me. So I'm going to go ahead and let him talk about this and go from there. All right, continue.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to try to tell the black community and what their movement should do. I'm more concerned about other white revolutionaries like myself. And what concerns me is that a lot of white revolutionaries don't seem to have any desire to talk to other white people. There's this feeling that they want to go to the Black Lives Matter rally and be the good white person who's there and feel good about themselves and go home, and then they want to spit on Trump supporters and call them racist and give them the middle finger and feel morally superior. But they don't want to actually engage Trump supporters. They don't actually want to debate them. They don't actually want to challenge their view. They just want to call them racist and feel good about themselves and say, well, they're racist. I'm better than them. Look at me. I'm anti-racist. I go to Black Lives Matter rallies.
An apt description of the modern white baizua, as the Chinese say. But yeah, the average white leftist, yeah, that is true, and that they don't want any sort of change. They just want the moral superiority to argue with them online or say Trump or this and that. This goes for the boomer, Democrats or the boomer libs as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. So ultimately, it's like, okay, you want to get these folks, but basically they don't like capitalism either. So anyway, let's keep on moving forward here.
And if you then are one of the people that tries to engage Trump supporters, they want to call you a nasty name. Well, you're pandering to reactionaries. You're engaging. There's no response to racism. It's like they're completely disconnected. There's no desire to actually try to get to the root of the problem. Because if you look at what a lot of Trump supporters are very upset about, the economy, the policies that have destroyed so many communities, they're upset about the rise of capitalism. And they're upset about problems that could be addressed with socialism. But that'll only happen if black and white can unite and fight. The identity politics that leads the left isn't going to get us there. The hateful bigotry that leads the right certainly isn't going to get us there. And that's, it shows that we Marxists have got to do what we got to do. I mean, we gotta be the ones to do.
Okay, he goes on and on for a bit, so I figure I'd try to get a word in edgewise and then continue on. I don't disagree with him, but I would say is that it depends. It's all different sort of communities. It's just, so we're going to see, there's so many different ideas out there. There's so many different LARPing groups who a lot of them are not going to be realistic. Apart from, in my opinion, at least in terms of gangs. Groups like MS-13. And I know Trump goes on and on about that. You sound like a Trump supporter. I'm just saying is that, the gangs have far more fluidity and much more organization, as messed up as it is, and it's much more individual. I do realize that, since the destruction of a lot of the bigger gangs and, people like Tookie Williams being executed and everything else. But I do think overall they're going to have more influence in a community than some socialist type movement. Yeah, it would be a nice idea, but I think that a lot of the time, I think basically is that, leftists are stuck reading books. And they would rather argue about something from 100 years ago than actually engage in IRL stuff in general. Or they would rather, do a lot of, showpiece stuff where they're trying to stop, people that, hold Blue Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, cookouts or something like that. This is something the PSL did, I think, in Minnesota, I think. And they just continued, they wanted to disrupt this and destroy it and everything else. And that, to me, just goes to show further that these are not, that ultimately they don't want to change anything. They just want to disrupt people. And it gives them the idea that these folks don't like America. Anyway, that's kind of a long-winded point. Anyway, continue.
To take up history's challenge and bring this message to the broad masses of people. And we have to bring it to them in a way they can understand. I mean, I've often said that socialism, when it comes to the United States, it's not going to be Korean socialism. It's not going to be Chinese socialism or Venezuelan socialism. It's going to be an American form of socialism. It'll be a socialism invented to address the contradictions in U.S. society at this time. And I think that we need to fit ourselves into a history of progressive struggles in this country, from the labor movement to the struggle to abolish slavery, all of that. We need to fit ourselves into the long history of Americans that stood against war, that stood for the rights of working people, that stood against racism and Jim Crow. I mean, there's a long history of progressives in America, socialists and communists in America that's been eroded. And the fact that Abraham Lincoln had a communist general in the Union Army, right? Joseph Wedemeyer, right? And August Willich was a general. I mean, the fact that Roosevelt met with communist organizers at the White House.
I'm going to try to give some constructive criticism here, and I'm not going to just try to be blunt here and just try not to be too nasty here. But the thing is that, yeah, that's all nice to say to people, but that's only going to, I mean, if you go down the South and you talk about, a Yankee general who, was a socialist too, it's like, well, it proves it, doesn't it? I don't know, it proves my theory. So that doesn't really help anything. And in general, it's like, do you think that, average white person, or some college-age kid, or, some kid that's working as a welder, you think he'll give a shit? And he'll be like, okay, and what? The thing is, I mean, you might as well just lie at this point and just say, Eminem is a socialist. It's like that the joke account on Twitter, your favorite is a communist. It's like, Eminem is a communist. You might as well just say that. Maybe that'll bring people in, or I don't know. You're going to have to make some sort of promises and not go so much about the history of it. But that's just my take. Let's go ahead and hear some more.
I mean, we have had a huge history in this country as organizers. We've had a big impact on U.S. history, and that's all been, written out of the history. And we're told that communism is a foreign ideology. It's nothing foreign about it. You're in Ohio. I believe you're near Akron, Ohio. There was a community called Zor. You know about Zor? Yeah,
I've heard of it.
It was a socialist community, one of the first, communities. You go over to Indiana. The guy who invented the word socialism in the English language, Robert Owen, he set up a socialist community called New Harmony, a socialist village. And he
Really?
It's called New Harmony. And he gave speeches to joint sessions of the U.S. Congress about the need for socialism.
Once again, Caleb, yes, you are very intelligent about history. You have done your homework. Well done. You live in Brooklyn, New York. You live in hipster you live in hipster town, USA, basically. And the thing is that you are a journalist, sir, once again. So it has to be put into context. I'm really trying to be polite here. You may not think I am, but I am trying to. And the thing is that, yeah, okay, that's nice to say all those things. Like, you can talk about the commune that, anarchists had New York as well, in New York State. But it's like, okay, what do we do today? That's the real issue, isn't it? Continue.
Right? I mean, we Marxists and socialists and communists have had a huge impact on U.S. history. We were key in the struggle to abolish slavery. We were key in setting up the civil rights movement. And all that history has been eroded. And that's very, very frightening. But again, we got to do it. No one else is going to do it, Mason. I mean, we've got our work cut out for us.
It's the precarious work. It's it's never going to be easy. It's never going to be easy. It's always going to be hard. We just got to keep pushing. I have a concept, I like to call it Mao on the mountain. It's Mao on his long march. He's looking back and he thinks, well, I can go back.
So here's one of the main problems. Once again, you have to mention Mao. Once again, you hold this idea. This is like Wignats who want to go on and on about Germany. Most Americans don't care. They'll just say Hitler bad. Who cares? And the same thing with the right. Same thing with the left, though. If you talk about Stalin and you talk about Mao, this and that, apart from Twitter and your Twitter users, and your Twitter mutuals, no one would give a damn that you like Mao. They'll be like, okay, what can you do for me now? I hate to continue to harp on this point, but I think that it's a very useful one. Also, I wanted to say too, I just wanted to show this off in a video. What I was going to say is that, I heard Black Red Guard. I'm glad that he finally, I don't really agree with the guy, and anyway, but I would say in any way possible. But I would say is that he did say in his most recent video that that John Brown was a bourgeois, was bougie. And I think it's important to say because, yeah, he was the typical rich guy, who had made money, this and that. But of course, ultimately, he still holds a view where it's just like, oh, well, we still like him because he did that. Is that he was trying to free slaves, this and that, and he was just a good guy. But ultimately, it was still kind of a form of liberalism. I think maybe I'm taking him out of context, but nonetheless, I think it is important to say, and I think that's I'm glad that he said that, and we can finally get rid of that myth. The fact is that he did kill a freed black man as well. And of course, I mean, people just want to say, well, he did a good thing though. He's a good white person for that. It's like, well, okay. I mean, if you want to simplify it for that, some radical LARPer who was some rich guy. I mean, I would give more credit to Engels far more than I would to a guy like John Brown. But okay. Anyway, continue.
I can give up, but then he realizes, there's so much more to gain than, just, to keep struggling. There's more to gain in struggling than there is just to give up. We got to keep pushing on. We got to keep moving.
Right. Well, it's very frustrating now because of this pandemic. You can't really have big gatherings and such. You can't really have conferences and assemblies, right? And that you can have these protests, where people assemble with masks on and march. And, hashtag revolution, they call it, where it's a short hashtag and people assemble because social media told them to, and they gather and they protest around the issue and then they go home.
Okay, so here's an original point. So far, it's just been me just basically whang, and kind of, I'm trying to be constructive, but I think overall I'm just making the same point over and over and just being stubborn. What I would say about the issue with COVID-19 is if I was more of a leftist, I would try to radicalize, or dare I use it, radicalize, or at least, get my family to have sympathies, or my significant other have sympathies towards socialism if they didn't already. And being able to radicalize that one person. It's easier to do that and to get that one person on your side versus trying to get 50 people out there and get everyone arrested. Surveillance hasn't reached the point where, everyone's being recorded and everything's being checked for, words, this and that. Then you can talk about Mao, and then you can talk about Stalin, and you can talk about the real history of this and that, or you can even talk about Eugene V. Debs, as my Avi shows right now. Then you can do that. So that's more of a relation to me. But anyway, continue.
Hashtag revolution can only go so far. I mean, because you need ideology. You need something to build it on. You can't just tear down the old society. I'm all for tearing down Confederate statues, but we got to build something, right? And if you tear down the old statues, and you don't replace them with anything, pretty soon people are going to take those statues and put them right back up again. People need something to believe in. There's a reason that Stalin put Lenin in the tomb, in the mausoleum, right? And there's a reason pictures of Lenin went up all over the USSR, because the people of Russia, they needed something to believe in, right? If Stalin had come into power, if the Soviet government had come into power and said, all right, no gods, no masters, no truth, they wouldn't have lasted. They needed a new ideology to replace the old ideology, right? Ideology is like a glue that holds society together, right? If you're going to tear down the Confederate statues, be my guest, but please put up statues of great anti-racist revolutionaries, right? If you're going to tear down the free market ideology of the United States, be my guest, but start reading Marx and Lenin, and that's what's missing is postmodern deconstruction.
Then what's the point of having statues at all? Why would you, dare I say it, but I think the insanity of doing the same thing over and over of, okay, well, let's put up a statue now of Eugene V. Debs and try to get people to understand who that is, or something like that. It's like, okay, like I said with my last point, okay, you can get people radicalized enough, but I think that let's not worry about getting statues up. Let's worry about fixing the roads. Let's worry about, getting everyone housing. Let's fix up the homes that we already do have. Why don't we worry about that? This is something I've thought in the back of my head, but you know what? I'll go ahead and get it out here. The idea is that, much like the Soviet Union, they had these, they had, the shock armies of labor, right? And to me, you just have a shock army of labor, and, you can set these up where it's a diverse group. So let's say you have a plumber, you have someone that does concrete, you have a carpenter, or whatever the case may be, and just set up these kind of dare I use this term, but I'm going to use it anyway, Kampfgruppers of these folks, and they have all their equipment and everything else, and they have these caravans, and they can go around, and they can, people can go into the local city, and, go into the local city office and say, okay, can you fix up my house? Here's some pictures that I have. Can you fix this? Okay? And so then you have this group of folks, and they'll come over and get what needs to be done. And, ultimately, I'm not sure how you would do for pay, this and that. I'm sure that you could figure something out. But to me, that seems much more reasonable, much more realistic to me. And then, trying to worry about, having all these different companies and everything else. You could just have everyone together. You can also get everyone to kind of, cross-train. And so everyone kind of learns their job and everything else. And this would be much easier to do. So I mean, that is something that I thought about. It may not be original. I'm sure someone else has come up with it before. But I think that would be, a great thing to have. Same thing with building homes. It's like, to me, I would worry about, we have enough homes. We just need to fix them up and to get them, and to get them good. Get them, maybe put in a new coat of paint or get some new siding, this and that, or maybe fix the problems that are there. Get that done with, and then, you can get these folks moved in. That to me seems much more realistic than let's be LARPers and put up statues, and let's worry about getting people fed first. Let's worry about getting people in houses first. Okay, continue.
Right, and the idea that there is no truth, that there's only competing narratives. This stuff that is very popular in left-wing circles doesn't really lead you to want to go out and build anything. It's all about deconstruction, and deconstruction for deconstruction's sake, I don't think is a virtue.
I don't disagree. Ultimately, what I would say, though, is that these are folks who are pressured into basically, getting rid of their idols so that they can replace them with other ones. And that doesn't involve statues either. They can say, well, hey, do you like this person? Do you like to make money? This and that. And to me, that's basically what a lot of the left is going to do. Do you want a more stable job? Well, hey, we'll give one to you. Look at the Black Lives Matter movement with people like, oh my goodness, I can't, D. Ray McKesson, who now writes for GQ. So it's all about perspective. Let's keep it there. Continue.
No, and and the thing is, I feel like, if you were to give an average leftist a hammer today, they would just see it as a tool for destruction, but not also see it as, that, yeah, you can take, the nails out of the house, but you can also reassemble that house with that same instrument. And they don't see that.
Indeed, yeah. Our work is cut out for us. But I'm curious, what Marxist works are you studying currently?
Right now, it's been a while. I was on the boat, so I'm just catching up on the foundations of Leninism, rereading the German ideology. I'm about to get Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth. But beyond Marxist ideology, I was also reading the founding document of intersectionality by Kimberly Crenshaw. I'm thinking about doing a critique video on that because there are certain Marxists who believe that you can just put intersectionality and Marxism together. When it's funny because even in the paper, the thesis of intersectionality, she says that it's a dismissal. Intersectionality is a dismissal of all past attempts that came before. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of funny.
I guess all I can say here is look out for that video for Red Scare TV. I'll give him a shout out. Why not? I'll go. I think I'll link both Caleb Maupin's channels and Red Scare TV's channels, just so I can be fair use and I can be fairly good faith here. But I think it's kind of interesting. Of course, like, well, what are you reading now? It's just you don't hear Niles Bowles say that. You don't hear. Well, I shouldn't say it, but you don't hear the Fash necessarily say that. You don't hear Eric Stryker, who's staring folks down. Now, they talk about the books that they read, but in general, it's like they don't really care if you read them or not. But, anyway, continue.
Yeah, well, I'm currently working on a short pamphlet, short book about Kamala Harris that's almost finished. It should be out in a week or so. not a very long thing, a very, very short little piece. But I'm trying to get it out as quickly as I can. I've been pretty tired lately. I haven't been doing as many streams, but hopefully I'll be back in the habit of doing streams. But I'm doing some research for the book, and it's going to be good. I'm going to be using that to make my overall points about critique of the left. I think it's going to be a good piece I'm working on about Kamala Harris. So that's what's in the works for me. But we just got to keep going on ahead. I'd be curious about your thoughts on current events. Have you followed stuff in Belarus at all lately?
I don't know too much about Lukashenko in general. He seems like a pretty base guy, though, in a lot of ways. Of course, they call him a dictator, this and that. Same thing that they call with, a lot of the, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Well, Kyrgyzstan, I don't think that's the case, but I think, definitely Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan as well. I think that they feel that way with Turkmenbashi. I know Turkmenbashi recently passed away, but still, I think that this is just another color revolution. And I think once again, I think that the far left and the far right can both agree on that. Same thing with Ukraine. I think in general, the smart far lefties and the far righties realize that the current Ukrainian government is not to be respected. And I think that's something that, once again, there's a little bit of solidarity on. Now, of course, that they ultimately don't like the idea of everyone getting along. So, anyway, continue.
I don't know where to stand on Belarus. There's been a lot of conflicting information. Usually by now I've assembled a narrative and what's happening, but certain people say, well, it's a color revolution, but then other people say it's a natural movement, and it's very interesting. For the first time in a long time, I don't know what to think about something, and it's kind of terrifying.
Well, I think it's pretty clear at this point that this is a color revolution. I mean, Lukashenko, they call him the last Soviet dictator, the last Soviet republic. He has guaranteed housing and healthcare and education. The Communist Party is the biggest party there. He's, somewhat homophobic and stuff, but I mean, that's not why they want to overthrow him, obviously.
What was that you say about color revolution? Yeah, I love that clip, though. I love that picture. Such good memes. Oh, my goodness, such good memes. But don't worry, I'm not going to say Shaba Surya Shah Asan. I'm not going to do that. But anyway, yeah, Allah Surya Bashar. That's it, yeah. But kind of relates back to Assad a little bit, doesn't it? All right, let's continue.
But what is weird though is that I guess Lukashenko has been clashing with Putin in Russia a lot. Because of that, right? He's kind of he's trying to kind of levy his bets, right? When he can't get what he wants from Putin, he gets friendlier to the USA. When he can't get what he wants from the USA, he gets friendlier to Putin, and he's trying to go back and forth. And that's led him to a situation where he's kind of isolated himself. And the sad thing is, though, that's what happened with Libya, right? Gaddafi made that mistake, right? That he kind of cut ties with a lot of people in the anti-imperialist camp, made a lot of enemies in the anti-imperialist camp. Saddam Hussein also did that, right? And that I think that Lukashenko needs to realize that if he thinks that he's going to be safe and be protected, and that his socialist country can remain intact.
I'll simplify what Caleb is trying to say. Stay loyal. Snitches get stitches. That's all you need to say, okay? If you make your bed, you can't try to play the game and be like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to go over to this side now. And try to be a turncoat. My friend, it doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. So right now, I can try to pretend to be centrist, but overall, I know that if I make my choice, I make my choice. So, that's all I need to say, really, is just realize where you come from and realize who who the people that you have decided to make money with, or who the people that you have decided to, break bread with. You better stick with them. Anyway, continue.
Just because he kisses up to Washington and they can use him against Putin, I think he's deeply mistaken. And I hope that this is kind of a wake-up call because, forces in the United States and elsewhere that want to destabilize Belarus and overthrow him, they haven't stopped doing it just because he's been kissing up to Washington lately. So I hope that Lukashenko kind of realizes what's going on and can figure out a way. And also, I'm sure there's real grievances. I'm sure there are there's real big problems with corruption in Belarus.
This is the same type of thing where, where he'll say, oh, well, anti-Semitism exists in these countries, and anti-Semitism has always existed in Russia. It's not that bad, it's a bad thing, but, this is part of the problem with politics, though. It's those little things in between where they try to just play it off and just say, well, anti-Semitism is a thing, corruption is a thing. Those little things ultimately become very big once they all add up. So it has to be put into perspective. Like I say, I try to do the same type of thing, but I try to be like, well, ultimately you're going to make your own choice. But that's my attitude. You know, he's got his own, Caleb has his, he knows where his bread is buttered. So I'll put it that way. Let's continue.
From what I understand, there's issues with, corruption and bribery and people feeling they're kind of locked out of the political process. And of course, the color revolutionaries, the CIA, finds real grievances and then manipulates them. I hope that those real grievances can be addressed, so that once those real grievances are addressed, then they can become a more stable and more prosperous socialist country. But at the moment, I think these protests are not coming from a good place. It's a lot like Euromaidan, in Ukraine or any of these countries. I mean, when CNN is cheering for a revolution somewhere,
it's not good.
Good hint that it's not a real progressive revolution. But what else has been on your mind?
Can't disagree with that. Definitely. If CNN cheers on a revolution or cheers on people like Guaido, it's usually not a good thing. Same thing with the Euromaidan. Definitely it's not a good thing. Now, of course, am I going to agree with LARPers like Russell Bentley? No, because people like Russell Bentley basically just wanted to escape their shitty lives. But that's my opinion. And if you like him, you can go ahead and like him. I'm just going to say I don't really care for him. Anyways, let's continue. Oh yeah, I did all that just to be petty. Sorry about that. I got to work on that. Anyway, now let's really continue.
I've also been reevaluating the history of the Soviet Union. Just seeing, there's that question, because after Khrushchev comes into power, is the Soviet Union still socialist, or what happened? I'm trying to reevaluate that, and I've come across a really good PDF called Brezhnev Reconsidered, and one of the things it talks about is I think that this is one of the main causes for the fall of the Soviet Union, is that during the Brezhnev era, the average age of the Politburo was about 70 years old, and the mindset of that time is, well, we're not going to innovate. We've done this for so many years. It's going to work now. We're not going to get into computers. And that's what led into the stagnation and the black market second capitalist economy. So I'm really looking into that. I'm really evaluating that because I think in the same way that Machiavelli was able to evaluate why princedoms before fell and make a very good book about it, I think, we can reevaluate the Soviet Union and do something similar so that we can establish a better power for the proletariat.
And that's fine, ultimately. And now I'm sounding like them. Anyway, I would say there's nothing wrong with what you're doing there, my friend. What I would say is that I've given up on the idea, really, that we should even give a hoot about all that history. Yeah, for some people, that will be a point. But I think, you need to have, as they always say, a multitude of tactics. Or, just, have a whole variety. And to me, that's one part of it to kind of reevaluate it. But I think it's like, let's put it into perspective. Can we? Okay, let's continue.
It's interesting. It's pretty clear that because there was a generation gap, right, that the Soviet leadership, the founding leadership, had all been dying off. Gorbachev was the first leader of the Soviet Union, who I believe had not been alive at the time of either the revolution or the immediate aftermath events, and that was pretty key. And also, the Soviet Union needed a lot of reforms in the 80s. I mean, they needed to change, and they tried to change, and the change broke them. And perestroika was supposed to be a method of addressing the problems of Soviet society, and it ultimately resulted in Soviet society falling apart. It's funny that position of 1956 being the year that capitalism was restored, right, that Albania and China took that position. It was interesting because the first communist group I was around took that position. They took the position that 1956, the USSR had become capitalist, right, that the 20th Party Congress, when Khrushchev came to power, had made capitalism in the USSR. And I was in this group, and I knew that was the line, and I really tried to believe it. And they gave me, they had a couple of books on it, which I read, And I really tried my hardest to believe it, but I just couldn't bring myself to agree with that position because I couldn't see any significant economic change in 1956 that, that changed the economy. And all of their criticisms of Khrushchev, which were valid criticisms, that he was wanting to accommodate the imperialists, he was, denying people around the world who, wanted to take up arms in self-defense, saying that only a peaceful transition to socialism, no matter what. Those are valid criticisms. They just don't make it capitalist, right? Society isn't capitalist because of a bad political position. It's about the economic base, the economic foundations. And I just couldn't figure out. The Russian Revolution, millions of people died, huge civil war, means of production changed hands from the capitalist class to the working class, right? Feudalism to capitalism. Millions of people died, property relations changed hands.
So this is why I'm more Nazbol than I am more of a leftist or a Bolshevik or Marxist-Leninist or whatever you want to describe yourself as. The thing is that I don't believe completely, that the idea that, it completely went to the people. No, that's not true at all. Once again, you had war communism or barracks communism, which lasted, up through, I think, just a little bit after Lenin's death. And then, it became more of a, the people would get their share, but I think it became far more about bureaucracy than anything else. And I know that kind of sounds like an anarchist critique, but in reality, that's how I feel about it. But anyway, I'm really just making comments just so I can just upload this without just straight up just taking it. I could just call it a mirror, this and that, but I think I would just give my commentary on it. Anyway, let's continue.
All of the USSR, right? Big dramatic events, But I at 56, I'm looking for. When you go from one social order to another, from capitalism to socialism, from socialism back to capitalism, it's a very dramatic event in which lots of people die, in which there's huge, big changes and all that. And I just couldn't see that in 1956. And so I just couldn't be convinced of their position. And some of their arguments I found to be rather silly. Like one of their arguments is that Soviet ballet, they said that in the Soviet Union, they performed ballet dancing from the Tsar. Whereas in China, they had revolutionary ballets. And I'm thinking, well, the ballet...
It's a cultural thing.
Yeah, that doesn't, and yes, culture reflects the economic base and all, but that in and of itself doesn't prove, and that I just found their arguments to be very, very shallow. But then what's interesting is, I was part of a group I then moved on and was with another group for a long time that didn't take that position.
I'm just going to wait until something interesting comes up. This is kind of boring so far, but we'll go ahead and just wait here. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now, overall, I would say this here before I do this at the end, but just to kind of say this. Overall, I don't completely 100% disagree with what they are saying. I'm glad that they are saying it. It's just not going as far as I would like it. Now, of course, like I say, I'm stubborn in my ways, and I have my vision in a certain way. That's probably one of my problems, is that I'm more of a stubborn guy, and I have my own view of things, which may not agree with other people. So, anyway, continue.
But they insisted that Libya was not a socialist society, that Iraq and Syria were not socialist societies, but the Soviet Union was, but China was, but North Korea was. They insisted Venezuela was not a socialist society. And I would argue with them and say, well, what's the difference? And I would show that economically, Libya was just as socialist as China and Cuba and DPRK. But when it really got down to it, they insisted Libya couldn't be socialist because they didn't believe in Marxism-Leninism. They believed in Islamic socialism.
Okay, this is from a place of genuine critique, and I'm not going to get mad at you too much there, Caleb. What I will say is that you are correct when you say that, it's more Islamic socialism and it is not based on Marxist-Leninism, such as the same way as what goes on in South America, which are much more influenced by Catholicism, since Catholicism, obviously, a lot of the Spanish brought Catholicism with them. But that's a whole other story. I don't know everything about that. But anyway, you better be careful with that. Because, of course, what people will say is, would you say that, that Hitler was promoting socialism just because it wasn't based on Marx? And, of course, that's a whole different story. But once again, people will say that as a critique of you. Anyway, let's continue.
And I said that was the same critique, is this about economics or is this about ideas, right? That the whole point of Marxism is rejecting idealism. Ideas don't define reality. Reality is the basis on which ideas are formed, right? Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. And so when people say that societies are socialist or capitalist because the leader says something, they're not Marxist at that point. I mean, Marxism, socialism is about the economic base. If the banks, factories, and industries operate...
Well, yeah, once again, I would say it's more of liberalism than anything else. This is something, of course, that Stokely Carmichael also talks about. Stokely Carmichael, of course, in one of his last speeches, I think in 1992, at I think it was a HBCU college. That's in the name, sorry. But anyway, where he said... basically is that, yeah, Marx didn't invent socialism. African, societies had socialism for for eons and eons. And so I think that's one of the things that needs to be realized. And I think people will say, well, they discovered socialism through Marx and Lenin and Engels and Stalin. But once they look deeper into societies, this is the whole type of thing where it's like, well, Native Americans had a more of a socialist society, this and that. And so we kind of see that. Anyway, let's continue.
On the basis of profits for private owners. That's capitalism. If the banks, factories, and industries operate on the basis of a state central plan and are forced to do what is in the interest of society overall, that's socialism. And that's the difference between the two social systems. And that socialism, just like capitalism, has many different forms.
I almost feel like I should take that clip and be like, what the fuck? I keep on saying Jason Underwood, sorry. What the fuck? Caleb Maupin is really a third positionist? What the fuck? He's actually someone who, many different forms of socialism. You mean National Socialism is real socialism based? But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to say, be careful, Caleb. I mean, the thing is, bruh, this is why, these bread tubers don't like you. Now, of course, I mean, I'm glad that you're saying it. Well done. But the thing is that they're going to continue to hound you about it, Anyway, I'm just telling you, man. Okay, continue.
When capitalism was coming into existence, right? In Britain, capitalism emerged as a very fanatically religious and Christian system, right? Oliver Cromwell was a religious fanatic, and he, persecuted people, and he killed millions of Irish people because they were Catholic. He thought they weren't true Christians, and it was a religious theocracy when revolutionary capitalism was in Britain. However, in France, when the revolutionary capitalists overthrew the feudal system,
I was with you talking about Cromwell a bit. I'm not up on history really, admittedly, but then you started to talk, of course, about the French Revolution, and are you really going to go down the road of defending them? Okay, I mean, you can go ahead and do that, but yeah, a lot of what they talked about was just kind of shit-lib type nonsense, where it's just like, oh, we can make people free, this and that. That's kind of the reason why people kind of failed at that point. Anyway, let's continue on. Continue forward.
And came to power, they were atheists, right? And they turned all the churches into temples of reason, and they said science was the only religion, and they were executing priests, and they were like super atheist. And then eventually Napoleon came in and made a compromise, and they became Catholic again. But, they had very different ideologies.
Some things really never do change, do they? We're going to worship science instead of, of religion, and, we're going to be against Catholicism, particularly this and that. I like how he left out the Spanish, the Spanish Civil War, and leaving out the left that particularly in Catalonia, destroying Catholic churches and digging up nuns and everything else. But of course, that's a whole other issue, isn't it? And of course, he's probably not going to say, well, we're going to see if he says anything. Let's continue.
But the class nature was the same. They were both capitalists, right? The capitalist class had overtaken the feudal aristocracy, right? Oliver Cromwell and John Paul Marat represented the same class. They just had a different ideology because of different historical circumstances. And I think that socialism is like that. Venezuela has Bolivarian socialism because of their historical circumstances. Russia had Marxism-Leninism because of their historical circumstances. Libya had Islamic socialism. And that again, this points to, we're circling back to what we were talking about before. We have to figure out what's going to work over here. If we're going to have socialism in the United States, we need to study Marxism-Leninism. We need to study, Bolivarian socialism. We need to study, Islamic socialism. We need to study socialism with Chinese characteristics. But ultimately, we got to figure out a unique brand that's going to work over here, because that's all that's ever going to work over here is something unique to our conditions.
I don't disagree, but this has become more of a Caleb Maupin is going to teach history and teach his views of things, and then, I can appreciate this to a point, but basically, I'm just doing this for extra content. I'll just be honest with you. So you can take this for what it is, and I'm just trying to get some extra clout. You can take it for what it is, though, and just say, I don't really like this, and you can just ignore it. If you do want to keep watching, you can go ahead and do that. All right, let's continue.
Well, and that's, Marxism that's taken place in every country. You've had your Hoxhaism for Albania, Mao Zedong thought for China, and, it's never a one-size-fit-all package. I had this problem when I was a member of the Youth Politburo a while back. They had this idea that, it's going to be this one-size-fits-all, approach to everything. We're just going to take Soviet socialism, but no, it's going to be different.
And I think that's the brilliance of it all. I mean, like Mao, for example, because Mao was very dependent on getting Soviet assistance during the revolution. He really, the writing that they published was very, very, Soviet, Marxist, Leninist, etc.
All right, I'm going to actually add some value this time. Before, I've just been, throwing some comments out just to, remain within, good faith and within, not just merely, uploading the video without giving credit. What I would say is that one of the complications with the United States, of course, is that there is not one monolith idea in terms of, sports, in terms of this and that. It's all kind of, in some ways it's regional, in some ways it's going to be, in very specific, during seasons and everything else, such as with sports. Do we just play basketball? No. Basketball, even though they say baseball is the America's pastime, but that's kind of a misnomer. Basketball. Basketball, baseball, football. Maybe to a different point, tennis. But then, of course, it's the same thing with religion. Now, of course, like I say, as Lenin said, I've said this over and over, is that, we are positively against religion. We are dialectical materialists. But, of course, society's going to do what it's going to do. But you're going to have some areas that are Catholic. You're going to have some areas that are Protestant. You're going to have some areas that are Muslim, Buddhist, even though those are fairly small. But, in general, it's the Catholic Protestant split. That's the wide margin. And of course, you're going to have to figure out how to deal with that, because of course, those battles are going to be very, very strong. Same thing with Orthodox, but of course, like I say, Orthodox is fairly small in the United States, relatively speaking. But, the largest split is, of course, between Catholicism and the various Protestant churches, or the churches that came from Protestantism, like the Baptist Church, like the evangelicals that you see, like the Seventh-day Primitivists and all that sort of thing. Did I say primitive? Anyway, you know what? Let's continue on. I've talked long enough.
But if you look at Mao's practice, Mao was very heavily influenced by anarchism. Before Mao, a communist, he was a follower of Peter Kropotkin, the anarchist, right?
And then the revolution hit and he became a Marxist-Leninist. Yeah.
But when he was waging the revolution, he built rural communes, right? He would seize liberated territories and redistribute the land. It was a peasant revolution. Well, the Bolsheviks in Russia had made an explicit decision not to have a peasant revolution. That had been the basis for the division between the Marxists and the Narodniks, that they called it, the Friends of the People, right? That was the peasant revolutionary current that Kropotkin and others were associated with. And the Bolsheviks said, no, we're going to organize factory workers. And that was the right thing to do in Russia, right? And they obviously had to make an alliance with the peasants, which they eventually did. Now, Trotsky opposed the alliance with the peasants. That's a whole other question. But in China, in the 1920s and 30s, if you were going to make a revolution, it was going to be a peasant revolution. The industrial working class of China was too small at that point. It was less than 5% of the population. The overwhelming majority of the population were peasant people in, peasant areas and villages. And, there's a beautiful essay, probably the most important essay by Mao Zedong, is his report on the peasant uprisings in Hunan. It's published in 1927. And that essay is Mao basically saying to the Chinese Communist Party, look, these peasants, that's where the revolutionary energy is. All over China, these peasants are rising up. They're killing their landlords. They're redistributing land. We can either hijack this energy and jump on board this peasant uprising and lead it to make a revolution, or we can just, be left behind and forget it. But this is where the revolution is going to come from.
I like where he's at least honest and admits that, yeah, we should just hijack this movement and take it for what it is. It's kind of like the unrest that's going on. You see, Black Lives Matter, of course, take that up. And, of course, we saw that, the rest of, MLs and everything else, you saw that they didn't really take advantage of that. So, take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, let's carry on. Forward.
Mao knew it, and Mao himself was from the countryside. He was, his family were wealthier peasants. They were like kulaks, but he realized that it was going to be the rural areas that made the revolution in China. Mao's own party tried to not take that position, but eventually, they were kind of forced to realize that Mao was right. And many times throughout the Civil War, the leaders of the Chinese Communist Party would try to fire Mao. And Mao would just rip the letters up because he had this big army and he had all these people. What are they going to do? And the Soviet Union would try to appoint different leaders of the Chinese Communist Party that were like more in charge or something. And Mao would just kind of disregard them because Mao was the leader because he organized the Red Army. And that's how you become a leader, by the way, is you do the work. You know what I'm saying? He built the army. He organized the people. He carved out liberated territories.
So while I am trying to be good faith here and trying to actually review this properly, I would say is that I still don't believe completely that the whole of the United States is going to become socialist. I still don't believe that. I just feel like there will be certain areas that could be taken, but I feel like the whole country becoming socialist is not going to happen. There are just certain areas. I think that the margins are far too wide, in my opinion, and I think that localism is going to be much more of an issue. I think regionalism is going to become much more of an issue and much more of a problem than it is in modern day in past revolutions, this and that. And like I say, ultimately I think balkanization is going to be the reality. Look at Syria. Honestly, it's like, I would say up to what, like maybe 75% of the country, roughly speaking. I could be. Let's go down to 70. 70% of the country has been retaken by the Syrian Arab Army and the Russians, and it's just that little slice of Idlib, and of course the shaded bit there, of course, right by the border, which was Kurdistan, or what was Rojava, but of course now is Turkish territory. And then of course you could cope and say, well, look at Hatay and all this type of thing. That's a whole other story. But it's like, so I think it's going to be much more complicated. Like I say, it's not going to be. I just don't see it as, the whole country is going to be in. It's very much more complicated than that. I think balkanization is much more realistic. But that's my take. That's my opinion.
That's why Mao was the leader. He wasn't the leader because Stalin picked him and said, "You're the one." I mean, it was because Mao could do it. He could get it done. He could organize it. And I really do think Mao made a lot of mistakes, absolutely, and there's a lot of things about Mao that aren't so good. But I will say that Mao is going to be on the level of Julius Caesar in human history. He's going to be on the level of Alexander the Great. I mean, what he started by getting China from where it was to getting China on the road to where it is now as the second largest economy in the world. That's the biggest turnaround. I mean, have you ever seen a country go from being that poor to being that wealthy so quickly, right?
Well, I'm seeing it in my lifetime. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's unprecedented.
I would honestly say that Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping have far more to do with the ultimate rise of China, at least in my opinion, than Mao Zedong did. Mao Zedong also got rid of a lot of Chinese culture and, kept China in kind of a state of paranoia, dare I say it. So, I mean, once again, I've never read a lot of Deng's material, but I'm probably just going to out myself now as more of a Dengist. But it's like, I have much more respect for Deng Xiaoping and Xi Jinping because they have, and once again, I show my biases. I like Chinese martial arts, and I appreciate aspects of Chinese culture. And I think ultimately is that Xi Jinping, and of course, starting with Deng Xiaoping, had much more respect for Chinese culture and Chinese history than Mao Zedong did, and didn't want to get rid of the three evils. Now, of course, like I say, of course, did Mao read about Taoism and have respect for Chinese culture? Of course he did. He's Chinese, but the actual practice and what he actually did is another thing entirely. And we have to, of course, look at the fact that the Sino-Vietnamese War, where the PLA was destroyed. And of course, nowadays, apart from some border skirmishes, correct me where I'm wrong, but in general, the Chinese, the PLA is not really fighting in the same way. So I think that needs to be put into context, and I think that they have used, soft power much better than the United States ever has. So anyway, like I say, that's kind of a long rant, but anyway, let's continue on. Let's carry on from there.
That's Mao's creation. Mao did that. I mean, what he did up in the mountains with a few guns and some peasants, eventually shook the entire world, and still shaking the entire world. I mean, the whole world is just reeling in the aftermath of the fact that China has just had such a big turnaround. I mean, it's huge. Now there's a lot of capitalism in China. There's a lot of market forces and all of that. There's a lot of corruption, a lot of things about contemporary China we can criticize, but to deny a social upheaval that's that big. But, Russia was the same way. I mean, Stalin took Russia from being one of the poorest countries in the world and made it an industrial superpower. The country that launched spacecraft, had its own atomic bombs, defeated the Nazis. I mean, socialism works. I don't know why people, stick to this silly narrative that socialism just failed everywhere it's ever been tried, because that's so opposite of the truth.
I think it's interesting where he says that Mao Zedong is the one that really made China what it is today, but then says, well, capitalism is bad, so of course it shows that his own bias being against Deng and against Xi Jinping, or at least not caring for them as much. And then, of course, he doesn't say Lenin started, the road to the Soviet Union. He said Stalin instead. Now, of course, I can agree with that. Stalin, yes, did many, many great things, of course. But I think that it's interesting that he doesn't say Lenin instead. I find that interesting, so I'll keep it there.
U.S. government propaganda. You look at those old McCarthyist films, and they really do sell the narrative. When you go back and look at them and watch them, because sometimes I just get bored out of like pure curiosity. You wonder what they're saying, but they're very effective in the way that they manipulate facts.
Yeah. Yes, indeed, and I mean, McCarthyism is very, very awful. I mean, and it was a big mistake. What was weird about it is that after a while, the ruling class of the United States actually got threatened by McCarthyism, because what's so bizarre is there were a lot of working class people who got involved in McCarthyism and were so mad at the ruling class they started calling like the ruling class communists. Right? Joe McCarthy accused the U.S. Army of being communist, and that there were a lot of working class and middle class people.
All right, I'm not going to sit here and carry water for Joe McCarthy. What I will say though is that I think that Caleb Maupin is being a little bit uncharitable. Is that there were many Hollywood directors, people like Trumbo, who were shown to be part of the Communist Party. This and that. And ultimately, when he talks about that the United States Army was communist, the only reason he was saying that was because his assistant, who I believe later went on to work for Donald Trump, was trying to join the United States Army and was, basically wanted to try to get him in, so that he was basically using his influence to get his colleague into the United States Army. So let's try to be somewhat charitable. Can we? Okay. Can we? Okay, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Who got involved in McCarthyism, but were like using McCarthyism to go after like some of the richest people, and we're so confused. They accused the Methodist Church of being communist, for example. They accused the Rockefellers of being communist, the Rockefeller family, and that the McCarthyism got so crazy that the ruling class are actually the ones who stopped it, because it was causing all kinds of problems. And Stalin died. Khrushchev was wanting to negotiate with the United States. And, the U.S. government was trying to negotiate with Khrushchev, but all these working class people, so full of McCarthyism, were saying, no, he's a commie. You can't negotiate with commies. And it was the U.S. government's like, well, we got to win the Cold War. It was like they couldn't control it, right? It had gotten so out of control. Yugoslavia, another example. Tito had broken ties with Stalin. right? And was aligning with the USA during the Korean War, was kind of betraying the socialist camp. So the USA said, wow, this guy's like a commie that we can use against all the other communists. Let's give him some money and support. And then it became a big scandal, and there were congressional investigations. The U.S. government is funneling money to communists in Yugoslavia. I mean, it was hilarious. But their McCarthyism, it got so out of control that they couldn't even effectively, be imperialists. And that happens. But really, what it is that, and as much as you try to get rid of the ideology, as much as you try to get rid of the revolutionary politics, it's going to assert itself. You know what I'm saying? People are going to fight for their rights, and people are going to assert themselves. You can't get rid of the anger that working class people have against the ruling class. It's not going to go away.
And I would say that's true. I would say ultimately this is kind of the struggle of human of just human living in a lot of ways, and just and human interaction really is this fight for rights, and the difference between classes, this and that, and people want to hold on to things, this and that. I think ultimately though is that what he's talking about is that, well, our form of socialism isn't going to do better. Ultimately, it's a little disingenuous. I'm not going to say one way or another. I'm just going to say let's be careful about what he's saying. But yeah, I'll keep it there.
Right.
And if you don't address it, it's just going to turn into fascism.
Yeah. And, and I think, it's similar with the Tea Party, right? I mean, the Tea Party in the United States was a reactionary right-wing mobilization to try and stop Obama's healthcare plan and such.
I remember watching a video by Keith Woods that he was talking about, is fascism really capitalism in decay? I think, Cultured Thug did a video on that as well. But I think he pointed out a book, I think Keith Woods, and hopefully when I get the money, I'll be able to get that book and kind of describe the real, the Janus of the difference between socialism and fascism, because ultimately they come from the same type of root, really. And that's something that isn't talked about. And of course now I'm cheerleading, and I know people can be like, oh, what are you saying? But ultimately we have to look at it like this: is that Giovanni Gentile and Gramsci knew each other. They learned under the same philosopher. I can't think of his name offhand, but they came from the same root. And it's just one took one path and another took another path. Mussolini himself was a socialist, and of course then people will be like, what? Well, he was a socialist, but this is the same type of thing. In my opinion, anyway, this is the same type of thing with Trump, where they'll just say, oh, Trump's a fascist, isn't that? Well, he was a Democrat for all this time. He went rogue and this and that. Oh, that doesn't mean, well, you sure weren't saying anything when you were getting checks from him and this and that. But that just goes to show that that's the difference between how things work, is that they have their own sort of McCarthyism, where it's just like, well, it'll just turn into fascism. Well, what does that mean? And of course, people can say, well, fascism can take many different forms as well, just like what they were talking about with socialism. You could say, yeah, you could have Franco-style, fascism, I guess you could say, or you could have Italian-style fascism, which in a lot of ways, anyway. Now I'm really getting into it. But anyway, let's go ahead and continue on from here. All right.
But if you talked to a lot of people that were at the Tea Party, a lot of your rank and file Tea Partiers sounded almost like Marxists if you talk to them. Well, these rich people have all the power and the government is rigged by them and they're waging wars that are not on our behalf. And it's like, wait a second, but again, they feed it. They have a confused ideology. They're all communists. And that's the weirdness of it all. That's why my argument is that we should go wherever working class people are organizing, wherever working class people are angry at the system.
Okay, now we're getting close to the end. Now the nitty gritty comes up, but it's like, ultimately they say these types of things, but you have to put it into context. As I mentioned before with the different types of religion, is that, once again, socialism, at least the Marxist-Leninism that you talk about, is against religion. And of course, like I say, this is why, you have all these types of things, because you have too many dogmatists, who say, well, we need to be worried, is that, we don't like what's going on in Venezuela because, there's too much Catholicism involved, or whatever it's going on in Nicaragua is too much, involves too much Catholicism. We're against that. Look at all the the stuff that goes on with kids and in Catholicism. Ooh, and then of course you get into the whole gender arguments and whatnot. Most working class people don't want to talk about that. Now, of course, if it was Caleb Maupin, then okay. But the thing is, if you're going to get people like Vosh, if you're going to get these folks that you hear on BreadTube, of course, unfortunately, a lot of people are going to be influenced by. They're going to be talking about gender and all that type of thing, and they're going to just hold the moral superiority over people. So that's the whole thing. Yeah, let's go ahead and continue from there.
Going to be isolated. And furthermore, just because something's left-wing doesn't necessarily mean we should agree with it. I think we should go and talk to anybody who's left-wing. But there's a lot of left-wing ideas out there that are somewhat problematic, you know, and that doesn't mean we should just go along with them because they're left-wing. You know, I mean, for example, you know, I agree with you that global warming is a huge problem. But this notion that global warming means we should end economic progress and that we should just stop having economic growth. That overpopulation, right? You know, that's a big talking point with these environmental folks. That stuff is not Marxist. That's very reactionary.
No,
right?
it's not. And it's not addressing what's causing, you know, is the fact that last I checked, we're producing enough food to feed the world 4 times over, and for all these markets and everything, it's not getting allocated correctly. And, you know, then we're suffering because, you know, some guy wants to turn a buck.
Yeah.
So this to me is a continuation of kind of like Project Cybersyn, where we can organize everything, and if we just produced enough for everybody, then it would be okay. This is another problem that I have with a lot of socialist ideas, is that ultimately disasters happen. And if you only produce enough to get everyone fed, then you're not going to have anything in reserve. Now, of course, this is the whole type of thing where it's like, well, if we only had central planning, if we only did it this way, then everything would be perfect. That's an oversimplification in my view. This is widely, there's such a, how would you organize it this way? And, you know, it's just such an oversimplification, and it kind of goes into liberalism, and this is kind of where the far right gets the whole eco-fascism, the evil eco-fascism, where it's this idea of, okay, well, why do we need to bring these people in then? Why should we accept these people of different cultures and to try to understand it? You know, it's like they're not compatible, and they don't, you know, they're going to stay in their own little communities. They just want the benefits of what's going on right now, but when it gets bad, they're going to leave. That's the view of, you know, that's the view of your, you know, your eco-fascist or your, you know, just your average everyday fascist. So it has to be put into context. But, you know, once again, maybe I'm just butting heads with folks. You have to try to make sense of it. Anyway, let's continue.
Yeah, and you know, I feel like the richest of the rich, you know, they admit that global warming is a problem. And then they say, okay, well, let's just, you know, the world economy can stop. We're at the top, so that's okay. So, you know, we'll just, you know, everyone should stop getting wealthier. I mean, when Obama went to Africa and told, you know, all these poor people in Africa that if they had electricity and air conditioners and cars, that would destroy the planet. I mean, that was atrocious.
He said that?
Oh, yeah, he went to South Africa and he gave a speech and said if everyone on the continent had cars and air conditioning and housing, it would be an ecological disaster that would destroy the planet. Well, I mean, that's not a Marxist message. We want to raise everyone out of poverty, right? And if we had a rationally planned socialist economy, we could get off of fossil fuels very quickly. We would put the energy and resources into getting fusion energy, right? We could rationally distribute resources in a way that wouldn't, you know, lead to these problems. The problem is capitalism. It's not people. You know, it's not human consumption. It's capitalism is the problem.
Okay, so like I said, I think I'm going to cut this down. I think I'm going to just cut it out to this to a lot of the better bits here. I think I'll cut, because this is going on for about an hour long. Like I said, I think I'm going to cut out a lot of the stuff where they talk about the parties, this and that. I'm going to leave this good stuff in. So I'm going to edit this a little bit more. But so, you know, I will leave links for the original video. That way you can describe it yourself. This is kind of the standard sort of Marxist argument where it's just like, well, if they don't understand that it's like, well, you know, China has capitalism and corruption, but ultimately they've raised themselves out of poverty, this and that. This is part of the problem, is that you're like, okay, well, your system is so great, but it's like, but now you're talking about something else, but it's like, okay, so how can it be this way? It makes people have to be like, okay, well, what do you really mean? It just kind of confuses people. It's the same type of thing where it's just like, well, if we just had our own way, if we were in charge and we set up our own people, then corruption wouldn't happen, this and that. It's not a people problem. It's a system problem. And I don't believe that at all. And yeah, you can say that people are influenced by capitalism. I'm not going to deny that. No. But the thing is that, yeah, you know, you kind of have to split the difference where, yeah, you can blame capitalism, sure. But you also have to blame people, too. You got to blame both. Where it's like, you can't just... Once again, this is going into some humanistic type stuff where it's like, well, we want people to all have the same standard. Some people don't want it that way. Why do you have to force it on everybody? You know, you have to make everyone live. And now, I'm sorry, now I'm going just super right wing and I don't care at this point. But it's like, you know, you don't force people because you feel like it's the best way to make them live in a, you know, in a housing project, much like the same, you know, like Queensbridge or something like that, like how people lived in the Soviet Union because they said that was the most efficient. Give me a fucking break. People are going to be like, hey, I don't want to do that. And ultimately they're going to say, fuck you. You're going to live that way because we tell you to. So, I'm sorry. I was trying to agree with this, but now it's starting to go into all the humanistic type feijoa that I really don't agree with. I'm sorry. Anyway, let's continue.
You know, I feel like a lot of Marxists don't realize the absolute potential that is in this country. Like you said, I'm a sailor and I'm mainly focused on the Great Lakes. So, you know, I'm dealing with iron ore, coal, and limestone. And the absolute potential I just see, like, so we have these ships, we call them footers. They're over 1,000 feet long. The longest one is the Paul Archer Gutha. It's 1,008 feet long. And the amount of just iron ore pellets I just see going in that. And to think is, you know, are we really using that efficiently? You know, what are we doing with that? Are we using that efficiently? Is it going to where it needs to go? And, you know, and then, you know, people are talking about.
I got to tell you, I know nothing about this, so forgive my ignorance here. Your mining iron ore out of the Great Lakes, or
well, so what you do is you go up to like Minnesota and Wisconsin, okay. And there's iron ore mines up there.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and cut a lot of this down, but basically I cut it off there because I feel like there's some good information in that, but I think it's just something that you can watch on your own. I will leave the link there. I will try to find it. But I think overall this is just kind of boring small talk, really. I think I've said my piece in general. Like I say, I didn't think I was going to get that angry, but I guess I still have my reactionary views, but that's kind of how I still, you know, that's why I still call myself Nosbo in a lot of ways, because I don't really, to me, it's oversimplifying. And ultimately, like I say, I'll play the game no matter what's going to be put in front of me. But I think that these guys, I think it's a little bit too idealistic to be like, oh, we're going to have, you know, if we only, you know, you know, it's not a people problem. It's a you know, it's a systematic problem. And I think to myself, no, it's a little bit of both. Yeah. Of course, overconsumption is bad, of course. But to say that it's not people as well is absolute nonsense. This is a whole thing that, you know, a lot of the lefties have to, you know, backpedal, including people like E. American Johnson, where he's just like, well, okay, well, we say open borders, we don't mean completely open borders, and, well, when we mean no prisons, that doesn't mean that we won't, you know, put, you know, murderers or, you know, rapists or anything else like that. Well, they've had to backpedal a bit on that. Well, it's like, okay, so once again, this whole idea of, you know, abolish the police and whatnot, it's like, okay, so ultimately you're just going to get rid of the current police and you're going to replace them with your police and your idealized version of police. And I think that's important to realize. So this is kind of the, you know, realize once again is that the game doesn't change, it's just the players. I'm sorry, this is why I can't completely believe any ideology 100%, because ultimately it is always this, the game doesn't change, it's just the players. These issues are always going to come up. It's just a matter of, well, if we just change the system, if we just change the paint, then that's going to change the idea of the house. No. Some people just aren't going to change. So I think I'll keep it there. I hope y'all enjoy this. Like I say, I'm going to cut it down quite a bit, and I'm just going to see what is left. I'll try to make it more manageable, because y'all don't want to watch an hour-long video. I'm only going to do that for one video. Do that for the response to Innuendo Studios. But I think, I think I'll keep it there. Anyway, y'all have a good one. See you later. Goodbye.